They told you it was over. They told you the names were buried. But what if the silence itself is the loudest clue of all? And what if the one person refusing to speak is the only one holding the entire empire together? Because the deeper you go into this story, the less it feels like justice, and the more it feels like a controlled collapse. A carefully managed narrative, a performance, and right at the center of it all, sitting quietly, almost too quietly, is Ghislaine Maxwell, and the question no one wants to ask out loud: who is she protecting, and why are certain names still untouched? Let's start with what they admit, not what they speculate, what's already on record. Victim statements released by the Department of Justice don't just describe a network, they hint at something bigger, something embedded in influence, in power, in visibility. And suddenly, whispers begin connecting Maxwell not just to Epstein, but to someone inside the entertainment world. Not just anyone, someone visible, someone powerful, someone untouchable. And then, right when those whispers begin forming a pattern, something strange happens. Ellen disappears, leaves the spotlight, moves overseas. Timing, coincidence, or calculation?
Walk me through this when you went to his house for the first time.
Okay. She took me over to the house. She waited downstairs. I just went up, gave him a massage. And that was it.
She approached you to
yeah,
work.
she's like, oh, do you need to make any extra money? I'm like, yeah. She's like, okay, I can give you, like $200. With this older guy in Palm Beach. He gets a lot of massages from girls. That's all she told me.
On July 2nd, now pause right there. July 2nd, 2020. Maxwell is arrested, charged, sentenced. 20 years. On paper, that should have been the unraveling of everything, but instead, something else happened. She didn't talk. Not really. No names. No confirmations. Nothing that would shake the pillars she once stood beneath. Why? That's the question that refuses to go away. Because even now, years later, she insists that Epstein was killed and that whoever was responsible is still out there. That statement alone should have detonated headlines for weeks. But it didn't. It just faded. Quietly, suspiciously. And then comes the testimony, the patterns, the same story repeating itself like a script no one can rewrite.
I do not believe he died by suicide, no.
And do you believe that, do you have any speculation or view of who killed him?
No, I don't.
Look closely at that pattern: recruitment, grooming, isolation, and then silence. Victims approached with promises, with connections, with the illusion of safety, names of celebrities floating around like a shield, as if proximity to fame made everything legitimate. And here's where it starts to tighten, because Virginia Giuffre wasn't just another name. She was a timeline, a witness, a living connection between Maxwell, Epstein, and powerful figures who still walk freely.
Ghislaine Maxwell.
Read that again. I am not suicidal. She said it herself, publicly, clearly. Almost like she knew something was coming, like she understood the pattern better than anyone else. And then, she's gone. But the story doesn't stop there. It mutates. Because once you notice the pattern, you can't unsee it.
Virginia Giuffre, the most prominent victim of the late convicted Jeffrey Epstein, took her own life on Thursday. This is just weeks after she made headlines for saying that she had days to live after she claimed to have been hit by a bus. A statement given to NBC News was quoted as such from the 41-year-old's family. It says, "It's with utterly broken hearts that we announce that Virginia passed away last night at her farm in Western Australia. She lost her life to suicide after being a lifelong victim of sexual abuse and sex trafficking." The New York Post says that Giuffre took legal action against billionaire financier Epstein in 2015, alleging that she was trafficked at age 16 after his ex-lover and convicted Madam Ghislaine Maxwell recruited her from her job as a locker room attendant at President Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort. The mom of 3, according to the Post, also alleged that she was forced to have sex with disgraced Prince Andrew 3 times when she was 17, including at Epstein's Little St. James Island in New Mexico, and and in Maxwell's London home, where a notorious photo of her with King Charles' eldest brother.
Threats, surveillance, close calls. Cars nearly running her off the road, not once, not twice, but multiple times. And suddenly it's not just about what happened in the past, it's about control in the present. And then, this is where it gets uncomfortable. The pattern starts appearing elsewhere. Other names, other sudden deaths, other suicides that arrive right when exposure is getting too close. Stephen Twitch Boss, a key figure tied to Ellen's world, gone, just like that. And the timing? Again, suspiciously precise. So now you have to ask yourself, how many coincidences does it take before it stops being coincidence? Because emails from Epstein files suggest something explosive. Deals, settlements, silence traded for protection. 25 celebrities allegedly shielded. 25. And among the names critics keep circling back to, Ellen DeGeneres. Not confirmed, not proven, but repeated again and again and again. And then comes the detail that refuses to sit quietly. The show ends, the spotlight fades, and almost in sync with Maxwell's legal pressure, Ellen relocates. Why now? Why then? And just when you think it can't get stranger, there's leaked deposition footage. Maxwell being asked directly about Ellen. Her response? Not denial. Not clarity, just shifting stories, versions that don't align, statements that feel rehearsed but incomplete. And suddenly, everything starts feeling connected, not in a clean, obvious way, but in fragments. Clues, symbols, conversations that seem harmless until you rewind them. Because behind the public laughter, behind the polished image, there are moments, comments, jokes that don't land the same way once you know what might be hiding underneath. And this is where the story changes tone completely. Because now, it's not just about crimes. It's about culture, about influence, about how power hides in plain sight. Protected not just by money, but by familiarity. People trusted the faces they saw every day. And maybe that was the point. And just when you think you've seen the full picture, the story twists again, almost like it was designed to overwhelm you with fragments so you never connect the whole. Because what comes next isn't louder, it's quieter. And that's what makes it more dangerous. Because buried deep in the evidence isn't just testimony, it's proof of strategy, diaries, personal records, the kind of details no one fabricates because they're too specific, too uncomfortable, too raw to be fiction. A young girl meets them at a camp, a simple introduction, a casual conversation. Scholarships are mentioned, mentorship, opportunity. It all sounds harmless, almost generous. But then the timeline begins to accelerate. Invitations, private meetings, gifts, access. And suddenly, a billionaire becomes godfather. That word alone should stop you, godfather, because it reframes everything. It transforms power into trust, and trust into control. And right beside him, always present, always guiding, always reinforcing the illusion, Maxwell, not as an accomplice in the shadows, but as the bridge, the one who made everything feel normal until it wasn't. Because behind those carefully constructed interactions, there was repetition, patterns, rooms filled with silence, other girls, similar stories, the same progression over and over again, like a system that had been perfected over time. And here's the detail that hits hardest: the parents knew. Not everything, but enough to trust, enough to allow access, enough to unknowingly open the door. Which means this wasn't just manipulation of individuals, it was manipulation of environments. Entire circles, entire communities drawn in by proximity to power. And then you start noticing something else. Names being used like currency, celebrities, politicians, icons. Not necessarily present, but referenced, dropped casually, strategically, as if just mentioning them was enough to disarm suspicion. Because if those names are involved, how bad could it really be? That's the illusion. And it worked, because even investigators admit it. Epstein's network wasn't just about access. It was about perception, creating a world where everything looked legitimate until it was too late to step out. And still, even with all of this, Maxwell doesn't break. Think about that. Mountains of evidence, testimonies, documents, patterns so consistent they almost feel scripted, and yet no names. Why? Because silence in this case isn't weakness, it's leverage. And the reports coming out of prison, they don't make it easier to ignore. Special treatment, isolation, privileges that don't align with someone serving 20 years, access, protection. conditions that feel less like punishment and more like containment. Because what happens if she talks? Everything changes. And maybe that's exactly why she doesn't. Because every unanswered question keeps the system intact. Every withheld name keeps the structure standing. And every delay buys time. But even time is starting to run out. Because new investigations are forming, commissions being built. Teams of legal experts digging into places that were once considered off-limits. Zorro Ranch, the files, the land, the history. And here's the thing, they're not just looking for evidence anymore. They're looking for patterns. Because once you identify the pattern, you don't need a confession. You just need consistency. And that's exactly what this story has. From recruitment to control to silence. From sudden deaths to disappearing figures to unexplained privileges. From whispered connections to public denials to carefully timed exits. And then there's Ellen again, leaving the country, selling property, stepping away at a moment when the pressure isn't just building, it's aligning. Files being discussed, names being speculated, questions getting louder. Officially, it's about politics, about elections, about personal choice. But critics aren't buying it because the timing feels too precise. Too convenient, too familiar. Another exit, another silence. And then, the final piece that refuses to settle. Maxwell claims there are at least 4 more co-conspirators who were never charged. 4. Not rumors, not theories, her words. And if that's true, then what we've seen so far isn't exposure. It's just the surface. Because the deeper truth isn't about one man, or one woman, or even one network. It's about how something like this could exist for so long, in plain sight, protected by power, influence, and silence so effective, it almost feels intentional. And maybe that's the most unsettling part of all. Not what we know, but what we're still not allowed to see. Because if Maxwell ever decides to speak, not hint, not suggest, but fully reveal, this entire narrative collapses overnight. Careers, reputations, entire industries could shift in a single moment, and yet she stays quiet. So ask yourself this: what is more powerful than truth? Control over when the truth is released. And right now, that control is still in her hands. Which means this story, it's not over, it's waiting.